to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And Butch, my listeners know me, but they don't know you. It's Butch Meily, and he is joining us from Manila in the Philippines. Good day to you.
And good evening to you, Greg. I'm on the other side of the world, literally.
You literally are, and in a beautiful part of the world. For many people who maybe have visited there, they know it is a beautiful part, and beautiful people that live and populate the islands there. So it is. You guys are great, and I see a picture, I think, of your mom and dad right over your shoulder. So
Yeah.
and you have so much to be grateful for. And Butch, you have written a book, and we were going to tell our listeners that it's due out May 6th. And he doesn't have a copy of the book, but for those of you listening to this right now, this book is called From Manila to Wall Street, An Immigrant's Journey with America's First Black Tycoon. And it's such an interesting book because it weaves into this great story all about Butch and all about Reg. And we'll just say Reg. And this, I want to let the listeners just know a tad bit about you before we get too deep into the questions about the book. And as we said, the book will be out shortly. We'll put a link to Amazon. We'll put a link to all the best booksellers. So he's written articles for the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Daily Times, the Baltimore Sun, Black Enterprise Magazine, and the Philippine Star newspaper. He's also done 2 book tours promoting his former boss's biography, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? Butch's current job is president of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, a private sector disaster management organization that includes the major business groups in his country. He's also worked in conflict situations in southern Philippines, including terrorist siege in 2013 and an ISIS-inspired rebellion in 2017. Butch wears several hats. He heads an Idea Space Foundation, a technology accelerator for early-stage startups, and a QBQ Innovation Hub, a public and private partnership launched to mentor startups. So he's doing that work as well. And previously was the vice president and special assistant to the chairman of PLDT. And it goes on and on. Butch has graduated from, and I want to get this right, is it Atino de Manila?
Ateneo. It's a Jesuit university over here.
Okay. In Manila, and earned an MA in journalism. And he also has a degree from the University of Florida, becoming the first honors graduate of the program. And in 1977, he established a permanent scholarship in his father Joe's name. And he made donations to the College of Journalism and Communications at the University of Florida. Well, this book is going to be a great book when people get their hands on it, which is soon. And by the time this podcast's out, everyone will be able to do it. One thing that fascinated me is, you worked for this black man who, Reginald Lewis, who became just incredibly successful. I'm sure the listeners want to know, what did you learn from him, and what during that time in history were some of the biggest challenges that the two of you faced? In spite, this was a very driven man. And I think people should know more about him and about you and your partnership or relationship.
Well, that's a great question, Greg. I mean, we met by chance. I mean, his wife, Lloyd, had gotten my name from a Wall Street Journal reporter, and she called me out of the blue. I didn't know who she was, and she said, "My husband's got a PR problem." I was in public relations, and don't worry, he'll be a big client someday. And with that, right, I took a call from him in his office, and I finally uh, got to meet him in the lobby of the New York Times on the way up to an interview there, and that's the only time I realized he was black. And I mean, for me, it was a new experience. I think Reg taught me a lot of things, but one of the things he did teach me was at least part of the experience of being African American in the United States, which I read stuff, I watched movies and all that, but I'd never really had that kind of a relationship with an African American where he was my boss, and we got to be fairly close together, and I I was his confidant to some extent, and but he always accused me, Greg, of having this candy cane vision of America because I grew up with Jimmy Stewart movies, Gregory Peck, all these things, and reading
Right.
Time, Newsweek, Life, and I just loved all that stuff. And I thought the United States was just like that, and people were just like that. And to some extent, I think that it it was. I mean, America is and was, a great country. But he just showed me just a different aspect to it, which I had not been familiar with, and so that made me think about things.
Yeah, your relationship certainly had it had its ups and downs. He was a very driven man. But one of the things that you had to do is you had to move from the Philippines to America. And it was really both a leap of faith and necessity. What were the most jarring cultural adjustments that you kind of faced with when you arrived to the United States? Because look, you've lived back and forth now, right? You not when but when you first started, that wasn't the case. Um, and how did this shape, meaning Butch's identity? Because here is somebody from the Philippines moving to the United States and working with a black entrepreneur, at the time, and as you said, you were in uh, communications. That was what you've done most of your life, right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
he had a problem, and you were going to fix it.
That's right. That if I hadn't fixed it, I wouldn't be here.
Mhm.
Or we wouldn't be talking about this.
Or this book, yes,
That's
exactly.
right. There would be no book. Maybe a different kind of book.
Yeah, exactly.
But I that was just my second trip abroad actually when I went to the United States. It's the longest trip I ever took. I'd only had a short trip to Hong Kong, which back then was a British colony. This is 1977, and America was like a breath of fresh air to me. I uh, I have to tell you, I fell in love with the country, with the people. I grew up in a strict Catholic upbringing. My folks were great. I had great friends, but it was just a very different experience coming from the Philippines in 1977 to the United States of America. I mean, it was just there's a lot of freedom. There, cousin of mine who lived in California told me you were free to do whatever you wanted as long as you didn't uh, affect somebody else or impinge on somebody else's freedom. So, but
Mhm.
and that really is true. And I just, at the University of Florida, I wasn't earning any money or anything, but I was living, very simply, but it was just a great experience. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my classmates and the people, and everybody was really open, and I just, loved the whole thing. I mean, I don't think Americans appreciate enough, what the country means.
Our
Yeah.
freedoms, yeah. Well, it's been as a challenging time here lately, I think, for many of them. It's a lot of division, and obviously, just yesterday, you being Catholic, the Pope Francis passing away, and you really look kind of how he left. There was Easter Sunday, and then Monday he was gone, and you think about that, and that's a really spiritual transition
Yeah.
that Pope made, and quite a person who was changing the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
and the way in which the Catholic Church fundamentally operated, right?
Yeah. Right.
And you talk about in the book, it's full of these poignant moments with your family, your father's farewell, which now you have a scholarship, your mother's prediction. How did your Filipino heritage and upbringing ground you during this most tumultuous time in America? Because, look, the 70s in America, uh, it was I know because I'm going to be 71 years old in July. So I remember the 70s really, really well, right? And
Yeah.
those were times when we had a lot of tumultuous stuff going on. What I remember more than anything was waiting in line for gasoline.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember.
I don't know if you remember that or not, but if you had an odd number plate or even number plate, you
Right.
were, yeah. So what 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 is it about your heritage and upbringing that kind of grounded you during these kind of most tumultuous times? What did your family teach you? What did you learn? And then you coming from a more, how do you want to call, structured, restricted environment to this really free environment that even though we were having our challenges, we were still much freer than the Philippines.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
let's face it.
We had martial law back then, and
Yeah.
that's reasons, it was good to get out, but, I think the US was coming back from the Vietnam War, and, some of my fellow, classmates, were Army guys. They were Army captains who the US Army had sent to the University of Florida to study, journalism, so it was good talking to them and comparing notes about what happened over there and what went wrong, but, I mean, in terms of what got me through everything were my values. I think the fact that my parents were good people, and, I think that's one of the gifts they gave me was that they formed my values. By the time I got, to Gainesville, Florida, my values were pretty well formed, and though I did all sorts of stuff, and, but I think in the end I came through it, and, I came through it okay, which was
Well,
a lot of people.
one of the things to be a journalist, you've got to be curious. I'm just wondering, you know, what role did curiosity really play for you in all of this? Because when you really look at somebody who is curious, somebody who has a purpose and a vision and goals, that really is some of the foundational things you need from a personal growth standpoint. And as you reflect back on that, you know, uh, I may be a podcaster, but I'm probably the most curious person that there is because I wouldn't have done 1,200 podcasts at this point because I'm interested in people's lives. I'm interested in the story. I'm interested in their stories. Um, and there is an old saying that I'm sure you know, uh, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm.
And that's a really powerful statement because you're a guy that cares a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, I believe, Greg, everyone has a story. I mean, doesn't matter what you do or, where you are in life, everybody's got a great story, and in terms of the caring, that's where what I do every day now, I've changed a lot, but the, being curious, I just coming to a new country, was a big experience, and then I moved around a lot. I went to Chicago for a couple of years, then, San Francisco, then I did wind up in New York City. So each time I moved or changed my life, it was a leap of faith and, taking a bit of a gamble,
Mhm.
but willingness to meet new people and the readiness to take on new challenges, because I felt this impulse to always try to move up the ladder and to try to do better for myself. And that kind of drove me in more ways than one, just looking back on it. But I was incredibly lucky in terms of all the breaks I've had. I think that's important for people that they're going to get the break. They just have to be ready to take advantage of it when it happens.
Yeah,
It's
that's and I think when preparedness meets that, which you
yeah,
were prepared, and as you said, his wife called you. So Reg Lewis is the man we're talking about. And he's described in your book as intense and brilliant, but also often volatile. And here's this guy. I mean, he didn't have like one of these personalities that was like, okay, meek and mild. Um, what was it like navigating this working relationship with somebody that's so driven? I mean, I saw the pictures in the book, right? Um, but so unpredictable.
yeah.
And I think you might want to set the stage here and tell our listeners a little about Reg because, he acquired these companies, he grew this into a billion. He was the first black billionaire, right?
Not billionaire. He never made a billion. It wasn't until recently that anyone made a billion. But he was the first African American to bid $1 billion for a company and to win it. That was Beatrice International, 64 companies in 31 countries. He bid $1 billion, mostly of borrowed money, and he won it. Those were the days in the 80s when you could do that. And he was also the first black guy to try to take his company public on the New York Stock Exchange, where we failed. I tell the story about that in my book. And then he was the first one to run a multi-billion dollar company, be it CEO, which is very rare back then. Back then, Greg, blacks really weren't allowed to live on Fifth Avenue. So that's what he used to tell me. The only blacks that on Fifth Avenue came in through the servants' entrance. And because New York co-op when they said no, that was it. I mean, no explanation.
Right.
I mean, they didn't need to explain it, so they just turned everybody down. But he managed to get in. He was the first black guy to live on Fifth Avenue in a great building, and that's in Forbes and a lot of other places. It amazed the real estate world that it actually happened. But he died within a month after moving in, though.
Hmm.
So he died
He
at
was
50.
57, right? When he died?
No, 50.
Oh, 50. So he was really young.
Really on a peak of his achievements and his powers, and that kind of shook me.
Do you
That
think that the stress of everything that he did, he was so intense and so driven and so I think that, sometimes people like that, the stress is just
yeah,
is immense, right?
yeah. In every day was like coming in for and getting ready for a fist fight.
Yeah.
And
What do you
Sunday.
think he was trying to prove?
Well, I think he had a lot to prove for himself, but because he came from a semi-tough neighborhood, let's call it that, in Baltimore. Got a scholarship to Harvard Law School, and kept moving up. And he was just really driven, and I think he felt this burden, to be honest, that every time he went out and did a deal or any type of social interaction, he was like representing all African Americans because there's nobody else back then in at that level on Wall Street. And so I mean, he felt all this pressure, and a lot of it seeped over to us. With
Um, yeah. You mentioned in the book that being both a participant and a server or observer uh, in Reg's orbit, that's the exact words from the book. Uh,
Yeah.
did the duality help you survive in such high stakes environments, or did it come at a cost for you?
Well, I guess it did come at a cost, but I found myself in the situations where he'd be yelling at me or he'd be yelling at somebody else, or there'd be some kind of drama going on. And I found myself sometimes standing outside of it and just watching what he was doing, and watching the reaction of my work mates and colleagues, and just wow, I said, "Wow, what is this? What am I what am I doing here? I should keep out the window or something." But yeah, because it was like the nonstop stress.
Yeah, I can imagine, and you know, you do a really great job in the book of explaining this too, and I want my listeners to know that. And it's a very engaging book because it really tells a story, but then it goes into your story as well. And you know, there's a moment when Reg tells you not to make his success a black success story. Look, you're his basically his PR department.
Yeah.
Um, and how did you reconcile your role in shaping kind of his public image with the deeper significance of his race in really a widely or largely dominated white world, and especially business world on Wall Street?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, now Wall Street, you didn't see in the 70s a lot of black men, and even today, you still don't see that.
Oh, no. No, still.
Um, it's really dominated by white older men.
Well, much more so then, but I mean, I guess, for him, it was like, battling through these situations, and making himself a presence, and not letting all this stuff get him down. But I remember race was always a factor. Whether we were going out to lunch, or whether we were just going out for a walk, or trying to get a cab in New York. And that made it always hard to relax, because even when we were supposed to be in a situation where we were having drinks, you could say something, or the waiter might be a little slower, the service might not be great, and he'd always wonder whether it was his race. And so, but yeah, back then, I mean, we'd walk into these big business situations, and I mean, we were kind of alone. But I mean, people would come up to him, and chat with him, but not many. And
Well, it's
I
interesting, you know, you look at this our world now is so mixed all over.
Yeah,
The United States is certainly a hodgepodge today.
yeah.
Back in the 70s, maybe not as much, but still there was so much segregation with blacks back in the 70s. And one of the things here I want to talk about is what you refer as power, loyalty, and morality. And you write that you made a living by attaching yourself to powerful people. Obviously, you're in the PR business. Was this a conscious strategy or something that you only realized kind of in hindsight?
Yeah, it was something I realized in hindsight, Craig. I didn't set out to do that. I just look back on my career as I was writing this book, and saw that. But in the middle of that career, like after Reg died, I uh, I began to realize that to understand that there was something there, that I had, if I could work with CEOs who were high up and powerful, or leaders who were high up and powerful, there were benefits to it. I mean, you could, and I consciously, at some point in my career, I consciously began to look for those situations, whether it's as chief of staff, or as their top PR person. And but there's a trade off for it. I mean, and that's the loss of your personal time and your personal life, with a lot of these guys.
Well,
That's
being a journalist and kind of like the PR guy for him, you really got it. I'm surprised that you didn't write a book about him sooner than this book.
like
Um,
like 30 years, 35 years.
yeah, think about that. Now, you you work closely with these people of power. Obviously, Reg was, even though he's black, he was still quite powerful. Um, and you had this corporate, political, and social. Um, so when you change, did that environment change your definition of success? When you think about the corporate world, uh, the political world, the social world that you were involved in, even with Reg, did this change how you saw how people became successful? Obviously, it's kind of a game, isn't it? You know, they're all playing the game. We can see the big game happening right now in the political world, right? And I mean, we go back to Manelda Marcos, who, you know, I always remember the stories about the shoe closet and the and I think the Americans remember that she had like 1,000 pairs of shoes or something like that, right? And now her son is still ruling your country, right?
I work with him occasionally, Greg.
Do you? Okay. Nothing against him. I hear that he's a wonderful, I say young man. He's not that young anymore, but the reality is, yeah, you do work with him occasionally.
Yeah, because of the nature of my work,
Uh-huh.
disasters, dealing with disasters and the private sector's response in these situations. So, yeah, I've had the opportunity. What I haven't told him is I actually met his mother, Melda Marcos, and worked with her on a Van Cliburn concert. I was just a college student.
Van Cliburn, boy, you're taking me back.
Yeah, that's right. Well, at one point, all these people were famous.
Yeah.
That's a problem with fame. But he brought him over, and I was a college student and had a chance to work with her at her peak, and I saw her technique for raising money for fundraising, and she could raise a lot of money with a few phone calls.
I I I guarantee you she could. Now, you know, you mentioned that this journey may have come at a cost to you. You said what you most wanted in life was love, a family, a home. Um, is that a regret or a price that you kind of came to accept? Because look, you were quite a busy guy. You were like crazy busy. What is the what do you want the listeners to know about this part of your own life?
Well, I do have a lot of regrets, Greg. I mean, I lost something along the way, and I think about it all the time. If I had done this differently, if I'd spent a little more time with my family, with my then wife, I always thought, I mean, because my parents, when you got married, that you'd be there forever,
Mhm.
and I realized much later on in life that that's not necessarily true, and I fault myself to a large extent. I very early on, my focus was on my career, and working with somebody like Reg or some of the other CEOs I worked with, they tend to take your time. And he told me at one point, I thought if I paid you enough that you'd give up that time with your family, and that was the trade. I said that's not true in my case. I it's a good thing I never had my kid, when I was working with him. I only had children. I only wound up with one son a few years after he died. I just never started a family, and, I kinda regret that. It's like I'm older now, my son's relatively young. I hope I get a chance to see my grandkids, but I compare that to people my age. They're grandparents. I mean, they're playing with their grandkids, and, they've seen their children transition and become adults. But I started a little late because of, all that work and all that traveling.
What would you tell the listeners today about impermanence and attachment? You know, the Buddha's philosophy, obviously, and in many spiritual practices, and you're a very spiritual man. Um, what is it that you know you've lost your father, you've
Yeah.
been through a divorce, you've obviously had your ups and downs in many different areas, and when we say, um, impermanence, nothing's permanent. Your job wasn't permanent. Your relationship wasn't permanent. Um, and detachment, or being able to detach, meaning not seeing, it's like, when is enough enough? If you give up something, so if I say, hey, well, you sacrifice time with your family for this great job with Reg,
Yeah.
and then you tell yourself, well, okay, I mean, because I've interviewed some of the greatest coaches around, Marshall Goldsmith, and he'll always say this. Well, interview these people that are just so ambitious and successful. They have 18 zillion degrees. They got 15 cars in their driveway. They have a 20,000 square foot house. They own two companies and are worth $500 million. And you'll say, well, when's enough enough? And they don't know when to stop.
Yeah, Greg, I don't think they're happy. I
All
mean,
right.
that I discovered. I think a lot of these people at the top are very happy at the end of the day because they come home and it's a really empty feeling. Even the relationships they're with are transactional.
Yeah.
I mean, they wind up with people who view them as a money bag, and when they lose it, they know they're going to walk out on them. And
What would you define as your what would you tell listeners today, because the elusive happiness seems to slip through so many people's hands? What are some of the things that you would say have made you happy?
well, I've learned that family's really important because in the end, when everything else is gone, when you've lost the fame or the money and everything else, I mean it's really the family, it's the people you grew up with, it's your brothers and sisters, it's your kids, your parents if they're still around. They'll never desert you. I mean, nobody will ever love you more than your mother. That's what I told my son.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's true. I mean, no matter who you meet, it's unconditional love, and it's a rare thing. So I'm looking for that. I'm searching for that, and it's tough to find that in other people. But I think that's really important. I mean, it's a cliche in a sense, but I think if you don't have that, if you don't have that love in your life, uh, nothing else matters.
Well,
Now, all the acquired successes.
I think one of the things we learn, Butch, is we talk about love from outside, but it's really, do we love ourselves? And many people don't have much, especially when you keep acquiring, going after stuff. You think that stuff's going to make you happy, but they don't really love themselves that much. And that brings me to this question. If you were to go back and whisper one piece of advice to your younger self uh, on the way to the first meeting with Reg, what would it be?
Well, I tell myself, get ready because this one meeting is going to change your whole life. And that's certainly not the feeling I had back then in 1987 when it happened in July of 1987. I thought I was just going to meet some client and have an interview with the New York Times and do our best there. But just meeting him, he's a larger than life figure. It changed my life completely. It raised me to a different level, whether it was financially or professionally. My life is never the same after that. So I'm
Yeah.
grateful for that.
Well, you've had a lot of people that have influenced you along the way, your father, your mother, uh, all kinds of other people you met along the way. If you were to tell the listeners out there about a mentor figure who changed the trajectory of your career besides Reg, what was that, and what stuck from them that you learned that you would say they had an impact on your career?
Well, it's a lot of the mentors I had in New York City in the PR world, who I really looked up to, and there are many, and they kind of took me under their wing and schooled me a little
Hmm.
and of public relations. So that was important. And then my professors in the University of Florida, they were great too. I'm still in touch with a lot of them, and they gave me a lot of confidence. And some of the Jesuit priests I grew up with in school were from the Bronx and Queens or something, and they left a lasting impact on me. They're all Americans, and many of them left the priesthood after that. Those were the days when everybody did their own thing. But they, while they were there, they were great models and great teachers, and I looked up to them.
Well, look, you've had spiritual teachers, you've had business teachers, and one of the things you've done is you're deeply involved in what I call impact driven projects, especially through the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. How do you define this, what I'd call is social responsibility in business today?
Well, I think we're faced with a situation where, I mean, I've been schooled in this corporate social responsibility, but now the situations are different. And what we're encouraging companies to do is that they have to be active. I mean, they have to be active before a disaster happens, during a disaster, and after the disaster is finished and the media's gone away. They've got to still be in place and helping people because there's nothing like the power of the private sector. And we can do things quickly in an innovative way. And if you can harness that, harness the resources of the private sector and help them in terms of preparing communities and businesses, small businesses, to prepare for calamities. They're doing it. They're saving lives. They're saving the economy, and when something happens, that's when everybody sort of jumps in. But which is great. But you also have to be there after the cameras are gone and helping those communities and businesses rebuild. Put make sure that they get their products and their businesses are back up, and you just don't leave when the media's gone. So
You
that's
really That's a really interesting perspective, because the world sees a natural disaster like an earthquake or a typhoon or something, and they'll see it from the media maybe for 2 or 3 days, and then after that, it's gone. And
that's
there's
right.
like, well, but there's so much more that has to happen to get this area cleaned up, to get people back to their normal, quote unquote, normal life, even if it doesn't ever get back to normal.
Yeah.
But I really commend you in this work that you're doing because it's so important. Now, your work really, when you look at your bio, um, it touches on everything from technology, as you said, to crisis response. Um, how do you stay grounded and focused when working across such as wide spectrum of initiatives? Because you're involved in these ideation things, you're involved in this disaster. I mean, you're a man of many hats. So, what keeps you grounded and focused? If you were to tell people today, "Hey, I have a lot of things that I like to do, but I need to stay grounded and focused."
Well, I try to prioritize things. I every day I have a long list of things that I list down what's important for the week. I list down what's important for the day, and I try to get through that list as quickly as I can. And I mean, I've got this book tool now, so that I'm juggling that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
The book tour, but I don't know if you can do everything, but I try to. It helps having good people working with you, and I'm blessed to have good uh, leaders who are working with me and who could carry the ball when I'm not around. If they weren't there, I couldn't do this stuff. Like, I couldn't run a foundation in disasters and a couple of things for startups, and then do a book tour too. I just
Well, you've got a lot on your plate, but you do a good job of juggling it, and you don't seem as affected by stress. If I think if there's anything that Reg taught you was probably how to manage your stress, and you're quite a spiritual man. And you titled your book "From Manila to Wall Street," but in spirit, it's about returning to Manila with greater purpose. Um, what's next on your journey?
Well, that journey continues. I'm focused on getting the word out about what happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s during this particular time in business when companies were getting taken over, when I worked with one of the most exciting guys I've ever met. and how what I learned a lot of stuff. And then at the end, I touch on the transition from doing LBOs and billion-dollar takeovers to helping people,
Mhm.
and how fulfilling that is, and how different it is from what I used to do. And so, I mean, it's all of that is important, but it's in the trajectory of a life. And what I've learned is that, as you were talking about, everything changes. I mean, nothing stays the same. And when I was talking to my boy and he was 9 years old, I said, he told me, Dad, I wish we could stay like this forever when we were living in Connecticut and I was teaching him baseball and all that stuff. And I told him, you're going to get older someday and you may not feel like you're always as much. He said, yeah, I'm going to get older, but that doesn't mean many things have to change. But actually, they do.
Things change because it's like it's the cycle of life, right?
Yeah.
And we look at our finitude. The older we get, we realize that the amount of time, whatever God gives us left,
Yeah.
we want to make the best of it. And that's why I think if you're an engaged, curious, uh, let's say older person, or middle aged at this time, because everybody says, oh, the new middle age is like is
Yeah.
70 years old. The
Yeah.
reality
Never
is that is that you want to make meaning and purpose. You want to make a difference. So if listeners were to take one thing away from your story, Reg's story, this book, what do you hope that it is that they take away after reading this book?
that that ordinary lives, ordinary people, being able to get home one time and kick up your feet and have a beer and watch a ball game. I think people like that are much happier than many of the people at the top or that you read about in the media or you see on TV. Believe me, those kinds of people are have more fulfilling relationships and happier lives than the people that are always in the news who you might envy or think about or who are always on social media. Many of them just aren't happy. They're very lonely people, and you shouldn't
Well,
wish it on yourself.
somebody who's in the media will understand this. I went back later in life and got a degree in spiritual psychology.
Yeah.
And the professors of that class used to say, and I love this about this comment. If there was a video camera, because this goes right to your media, and it followed you all day long, and you watched that video back at the end of the day, would you like what you saw? And I think there's something to be said for that. In other words, it's like, hey, if a video camera followed me during the day, what is it that I am doing that's making a difference? And did I like what it was that I saw at the end of the day? And I want to say to you, Butch, that it's been a pleasure having you on this podcast. It's been an honor to have you on. And for all my listeners, if you want to know more, go to Butch, ButchMeily.com. There you're going to learn more about his writings, his book, his blog, and so on. We'll put a link to that as well. Also, this book will be in our show notes where there'll be a link to Amazon to get the book. So this book is called From Manila to Wall Street, An Immigrant's Journey with America's First Black Tycoon. And Butch, it's just been an honor having you on the show. I enjoyed having you today to speak about this book, your life, Reg's life, the lessons you've learned, and the things that our listeners will learn if they pick up a copy of your book and they go read the book, because there's a lot of great stories, but there's also a lot of great lessons that come from that. So again, thank you for being on. Namaste to you. Thank you for everything that you do in the Philippines, here in the United States, with your Idea Space Foundation, the things that you're doing with your innovation hubs. I'm sure that all of the young people or middle-aged people that are involved in that are learning a lot from you.
Yeah, and I hope so. But thank you for having me on, Greg. I really enjoyed the show, and you're a great guy.